Oh, no, I can do the journal.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast by the host and or the guest do not necessarily reflect the views of the host and or Paranormal Buzz Radio and or its sponsors. Use of any material produced by Paranormal Buzz Radio without express written consent is prohibited. Paranormal Buzz Radio will not be held responsible for you holding your knees, crying, and rocking in a corner in a puddle of your own urine, or being beheaded by a group of children in the cornfield. In fact, if you come across a group of children in a cornfield, we promise to make fun of you as you run away screaming in terror. Listener discretion is advised.
You're listening to RAP Paranormal and Friends with your hosts,
Kim Purvis
and Allison Robinson. Make sure to check us out on our Facebook pages, RAP Paranormal and Friends and RAP Paranormal Busters, for up-to-date show information and events. Hey everyone, welcome to RAP Paranormal and Friends. We have a special guest for you. He is a philosopher, metaphysician, who has traveled the globe and has studied the roots of humanity's religious and spiritual traditions in numerous secret societies, and has a new book out called The Journey Across Forever, a magical provocation odyssey across the ages, around the world, and into the great beyond. Please welcome Wayne Saalman to the show. Thank you. It's a pleasure to finally have you on.
And a delight to be here. Thank you very much.
Yes, absolutely. So, Wayne, before we jump into some questions about your book, give us a little bit of background on yourself and what made you want to start writing.
I think I have always had a penchant for it. I can remember even back in elementary school, coming home from the last day of class one summer or one school year, and I just had it in my head I was going to write a novel that year, and I must have been only about 9 or 10 years old.
Pretty ambitious.
But yeah, I think a lot of the inspiration for me was my dreams. I had a lot of flying dreams from a very young age, and they always intrigued me, and eventually I kept getting better and better at it. So then it was like I was learning how to fly in my dreams, and they got more vivid, and they kept going until there's the point where I burst through into outer space one night. Yeah, so my first novel, The Dream Illuminati, was about flying in your dreams and living those dreams. So that's kind of where the path began. I think it had a lot to do with rock and roll, with music when I was younger. The Beatles were the big band in the 60s as I was coming of age. And of course, they wrote their own songs.
Yeah.
And so like millions, I would say, I was inspired to start writing songs. I learned the guitar and started writing lyrics. And, you know, I did as much as I could with music, but eventually I just got so philosophical about it that I started filling notebooks full of my insights and speculations and so forth. And eventually that led to writing books.
Very nice. Very nice. Now, with your book, A Journey Across Forever. Your other books were fiction books, but this one was nonfiction. What made you change the path?
Well, the my fiction books are full of substance. I have just had I would tend to read more nonfiction than I was reading fiction,
Hmm.
but I didn't know I wasn't ready for many years, decades really,
Hmm.
to be honest about it. Like when you're writing nonfiction, you want to be very confident about what you're writing and feel like you really have a full grasp of the topics and so forth.
Hmm.
And so with fiction, you can just let your imagination run wild. So I was reading Robert Anton Wilson. He was one of the early inspirations.
Hmm.
And in fact, the title, The Dream Illuminati, that was a play on a lot of his work. He wrote about the Illuminati quite a bit. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but
I am not. I don't think I've come across him. I don't believe I have. Mm-mm.
okay. Well, Robert Anton Wilson and Timothy Leary
Hmm.
were both authors on Falcon Press, and I had sent my first fiction work to Falcon Press and was accepted by Falcon Press.
Hmm.
And Robert Anton Wilson, he's written upwards of 20 books or so.
Hmm.
He is deceased now, but he's a great inspiration to many people who are into metaphysics. And there's like 6 fan-based Facebook pages for him for those interested.
Oh, wow.
But
Okay. Uh-huh.
but he and Timothy Leary, they influenced the 60s and the 70s a great deal.
Hmm.
And I was a young man in those years, traveling, got into traveling very young, and I was inspired by Jack Kerouac's On the Road, if you're familiar with that work.
Hmm.
So the cross-country trip and,
Hmm.
indulging oneself, shall we say, in
Yeah.
youthful frolics.
Yeah.
So uh, it all was just inspirational, and
Mhm.
we were very nonconformist people who wanted to not get caught up in the system.
Right.
The Vietnam War was raging. Who wanted to go there and die? Like it was pointless. There was a lot of rejection of that war during the 60s and early 70s.
Hmm.
I almost got drafted for it, but escaped fortunately, and
Oh, wow.
instead hit the road and had the time of my
Oh, my
life.
life.
So,
Yeah, I would say so. Well, you kind of already answered my question about Robert. So, um, you have many different topics in this book, but one of them you do talk about in your book, Journey Across Forever. You talk about your um, death experiences in the afterlife. Um, what do you think happens when we depart this planet? Like, what, I mean, do you believe in the near-death
yes,
experience in afterlife?
I'm thoroughly convinced actually that we continue on. I've read scores of books on by people who have had experiences of dying briefly and returning,
Mm-hmm.
and it's incredible how much that literature has now caught on with people. I think
Oh,
it
uh-huh.
provides a new paradigm,
Mm-hmm.
in fact, for people who are spiritually minded.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the Like Anita Morjani, for example, who had died of serious
Mm-hmm.
cancer complications
Mm-hmm.
and went into this other dimension and had amazing experiences. And
Mm-hmm.
when she chose to go back, they seem to give you the choice. You meet a being of light who
Mm-hmm.
speaks telepathically to you. And when she went back, her cancer tumors were cured within a few weeks
Oh, wow.
or maybe a month or so. And this story spread. She wasn't even intending to write a book, but eventually
Mm-hmm.
Wayne Dyer heard about her story, and then
Mm-hmm.
a physician also heard about her story and asked if he could look at the hospital records to confirm that what she was saying was true.
Mm-hmm.
And she absolutely died of
Oh, wow.
cancer and was cured upon her return. So that's an excellent book to read. It's called Dying to Be Me.
Uh-huh.
Another brilliant book to read is by Dr. Eben Alexander, who's a neurosurgeon, actually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Proof of Heaven is the name of his book. So you read books like that where they're so specific.
Mm-hmm.
Like Dr. Alexander, he had, a brain complication where there's just no way his brain could have produced the experience he had because he totally flatlined and
Mm-hmm.
there was all kinds of infection. It was a form of
Oh,
meningitis,
wow. Okay.
and it was so serious, like he was in a coma for
Mm-hmm.
an extended period. But the story he tells is just phenomenal. And
Wow.
he met someone in the other dimension who turned out to be a sister that he had never even known
Oh, wow.
in this world,
Mm-hmm.
and they had kept that information from him.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing after another, and that to him was like an absolute proof.
Mm-hmm.
But I have had experiences
Mm-hmm.
which I'm big into dream yoga,
Oh,
lucid dreaming, and just being very attentive to my dreams. And I have been, I believe, on the other side.
mm-hmm.
And that is very convincing when you experience something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm convinced that we do go on and that this is the new paradigm for our
Mm-hmm.
spiritual evolution. There's the almost invariably people say it does not matter in the least what religion you were
Mm-hmm.
subscribed to while you were on earth. Like it's just about love and kindness. You do have a life review
Mm-hmm.
that is apparently just so intense that we learn incredible lessons through re-seeing and reliving our life experience. We
Mm-hmm.
feel every emotion we felt, but even more importantly, and I really emphasize this in the book, we feel how we made other people feel.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I call this the ultimate karmic moment.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So
Yep. Mm-hmm.
whatever you do, good or bad, is going to
Mm-hmm.
come back to you, and
Right.
that's karma. That's
Mm-hmm.
karma.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so I think it all bodes very well that we do have a journey across forever, that
Mm-hmm.
we live life after life. I believe in karma and reincarnation,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where I've been led to believe that we go
Mm-hmm.
once we do depart the body.
Right. Now, do you think that when people have these near-death experiences that opens up for them their spirituality, like they're more open-minded to that? Like,
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. That almost invariably is life changing. Apparently,
Mm-hmm.
like most no longer fear death for starters.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Almost invariably, people have a positive experience.
Mm-hmm.
Although there are reports of people who have had hellish experiences, but
Yes, which I have read about. Yeah, I did
yeah.
a
So
little
I
look
think,
on that. Mm-hmm.
by and large, though, these beings of light that invariably greet us when we cross over, like
Mm-hmm.
you might at first see relatives
Mm-hmm.
or friends or somebody really close. I think the whole thing is that the way it's structured, the psycho-spiritual complex, is such that we deal first with familiarities,
Mm-hmm.
comfortable settings for ourselves so that we're not frightened. But these beings of light apparently radiate incredible amounts of love.
Mm-hmm.
They don't say who they are, which is interesting,
Right.
but
Mm-hmm.
people project upon them. Maybe they
Mm-hmm.
say this is Jesus or Buddha or
Mm-hmm.
Krishna or an angel.
Mm-hmm.
It just depends on what your familiarities are and what
Mm-hmm.
you believe subconsciously at the deepest levels.
Mm-hmm.
But they radiate love and envelop people in love. The spirit is just overwhelmed, does not want to go back to earth, to
Mm-hmm.
the suffering that can go
Right.
on.
Right.
But the choice then is given. Do you want to stay here and move on, or do
Mm-hmm.
you want to go back? And usually, though, they're kind of told, look, it's not yet your time. That's why you
Mm-hmm.
have to go back.
Mm-hmm.
And they do. And then
Mm-hmm.
they end up telling these incredible stories.
Right. We had a gentleman on, David Ditchfield, um, a year or two ago, and he was actually drugged by a train. He's from the UK, and he had a near-death experience that he talked about. And his was more colors and auras, and there was different beings that he couldn't really describe as to who they were. But when he came back, he actually came back with and was able to compose music and became an artist. Have you heard
Wow.
people, have you heard anything like that before? People coming back with different purposes?
Yeah, I think a lot of the people will come back and say, I have a mission now.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Not like to convert people to anything, but to
Mm-hmm.
actually to take a talent like that and
Mm-hmm.
spread the positivity through their
Right.
talent.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
could be music or painting, like you say.
Mm-hmm.
Quite interestingly, I have one of the chapters in the book
Mm-hmm.
is called Proof of Consciousness, and I think uh, people who have savant syndrome are really in touch with a higher level of intelligence, which, some of these can barely tie their shoes or feed
Mm-hmm.
themselves, and
Mm-hmm.
um, like they might be able to recite mathematical things that just absolutely are almost miraculous. Like one person I talk about in the book
Mm-hmm.
was able to tell the derivations of pi to something like 22,000 places.
Oh,
And
wow.
I mean, how is that possible?
Yeah, I don't know.
Or the one young man who heard I can't remember which sonata at the top of my head. He heard a song on the by one of the great composers, and that night the parents were in bed, and he started playing the piano, and did this full sonata,
Wow.
and he never even had a piano lesson.
Oh my gosh,
So
wow.
I think the human mind is a subunit of a vast higher intelligence, and that
Mm-hmm.
we underestimate ourselves, for our whole psycho spiritual complex is just
Mm-hmm.
amazing, really.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, for sure. I think we keep things bottled up, and maybe it does take an experience like that to let that inner self out, if you want to put it that way, or something. You know what I mean? Like, I think we
Yeah.
all. Um, Now, when you were younger, you had some experiences. Do you want to elaborate? Give us some.
Well, one of the first experiences that really set my life in a certain direction
Mhm.
was as around 10 or 11 years of age. I was playing ball with my brother in the front yard of our home. It was
Mhm.
a sunny afternoon, not a cloud in the sky. And suddenly, over the roof of our house, a round silver disc came flying over.
Oh, wow.
And it was so low in the sky, I could almost have thrown the ball and hit it. But
Oh, oh my
this
gosh.
was not a typical flying saucer, as
Mm-hmm.
one might think. It was more like a shuttlecraft,
Mm-hmm.
but soundless, and seemed to have kind of a magnetic field around it because there were two people
Mm-hmm.
standing on the deck
Mm-hmm.
of this. There was a railing around this disc.
Oh, wow.
They were standing at the back of the
Mm-hmm.
disc,
Mm-hmm.
and we looked up at them and waved at them, and they waved down at us.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
and we were so amazed, but like there were a lot of newfangled inventions at the time, so
Mm-hmm.
we didn't really realize how special this moment was for
Right.
quite some time. But
Mhm.
I've subsequently, like many years later, when I started reading about UFOs and things, I thought, what was that we
Mhm.
saw?
Right.
And I think in retrospect, these were humanoids.
Hmm.
They looked just like human beings, but they were looked like two characters out of Star Trek. They were a man and a woman, very
Uh-huh.
handsome couple,
Uh-huh.
and they had like brown uniforms on. And I could say we waved at them, they waved at us, big
Hmm.
smiles. We ran in and got our mother. She came running out and could see it in the distance as it just
Uh-huh.
flew on.
Oh, wow.
And so that to me, you know, as the decades went by and I realized how unique and special and how I'd never seen another one of these,
Hmm.
neither the United States or Russia or any other power that I know of has
Hmm.
ever had one of these, or we would have
Hmm.
seen
Right.
something like this.
Right.
So, I'm left to draw that conclusion that these were a couple of humanoids on their way just being shuttled across the countryside. Who knows where they were going? This is in Ohio. They
Uh-huh.
maybe Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I don't know.
No. Oh my goodness. Yeah. With all the, um, you know, we've talked about it for years, UFOs, now they call them UAPs,
Yeah.
um, and things, but now all of a sudden, it's coming to light a little bit more, but they're kind of already telling us things that we've already kind of known. Do you think they're going to give us some more information, or do you think they're going to keep that ball up?
Well, it is coming out
Uh-huh.
in dribs and drabs, isn't it? Like there
Hmm.
was just a
Yeah.
congressional meeting
Right.
only a week or two ago.
Hmm.
And of course, this David Grush now is an insider who claims that we have crash retrievals.
Hmm.
I think the crucial date that's going to stand in time is December 17, 2017, when the New York Times reported about Luis Elizondo and the Pentagon program that he had been heading and saying,
Hmm.
look, we need to tell the people about this, and the Pentagon wasn't allowing it, or the government
Hmm.
wasn't allowing it. So he resigned, frustrated, but he told his story, and
Hmm.
then shortly thereafter, we see images from the Navy videos of the Tic
Hmm.
Tac and this
Uh-huh.
sort of thing. So
Hmm.
it is coming out, and I think they're not going to stand up there and make announcements, but
Hmm.
most young people I talk to today are total believers. Like
Oh,
they
yeah.
don't question that
Hmm.
we're, it's ridiculous to think we're all alone in the universe.
Right. Hmm.
But I do tend to believe that we might be dealing more with interdimensionals than
Hmm.
with uh, extraterrestrials.
Hmm.
So, like
Hmm.
one of
I
the
agree with
other
that. Yeah.
chapters in the book I write about
Hmm.
is where when I met Jim Mars, who he wrote the most popular now the biggest selling book on the phenomenon
Hmm.
uh, called Alien Agenda. So I met him in the late '90s
Hmm.
in Texas, in Aurora, Texas, where in 1897 supposedly a craft crashed into
Hmm.
a windmill.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yep.
you can see an episode. I think it's season 3, the first episode of Ancient Aliens
Hmm.
has Jim in it, and they talk about that particular event,
Hmm.
which was in the Dallas newspaper reported.
Yeah.
But one of the key things I think Jim uh, bequeathed us is he said there are probably 3 major, very broadly speaking, categories of aliens, if you will.
Hmm.
There's the humanoids that I just spoke about.
Hmm.
Then there's the grays that
Hmm.
Whitley Strieber, among others, has made well known. These
Hmm.
are not the big friendly type like the
Right. Yes.
humanoids.
Yep.
Yeah,
Correct.
so they're a
Yep.
bit
Uh-huh.
frightening. But the
Yes.
third category I think is extremely interesting. He called them transcendentals.
Hmm. I
And
don't think I've heard that one.
yeah, so they are non-corporeal apparently,
Hmm.
and but they can manifest into our world. And I think these might well be what we've called angels over the millenniums.
Okay.
So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so, the trick about these UAPs is that they can appear and disappear.
Mm-hmm.
They can do things that violate our laws of physics. And
Mm-hmm. Right.
we're saying, how can this be? How can they do that?
Mm-hmm.
To even, well, you can conjecture it might be technology,
Mm-hmm.
but there might be a higher level of mind that is really operating with manifestations, or as the ancient Buddhists and Hindus would say, emanations
Mm-hmm.
uh, of the gods,
Mm-hmm.
And these were probably the beings we called the gods in history. So it's a very popular format nowadays. And like I say,
Mm-hmm.
not only the young people, but I'm getting great reception on my stories in The Journey Across Forever.
Mm-hmm.
And the foreword of the book was written by Colonel John Alexander,
Mm-hmm.
who's a great writer and experiencer himself. He wrote a book called UFOs, Myths, Conspiracies, and Realities,
Mm-hmm.
and another book called Reality Denied, Firsthand Experiences with Things That Can't Happen, but Did.
Mm-hmm.
So the colonel was an insider. He's retired now from the Army, but
Mm-hmm.
he wrote an extensive introduction to the book,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm in concurrence with him about his perception of what the whole phenomenon is about. And as he says, the universe is more complex than we think.
Mm-hmm.
Every time we think we got it nailed, something changes, something
Mm-hmm.
happens that just doesn't fit into our, how we want to describe these things and these beings and
Mm-hmm.
these events. They're very mysterious, but very
Yes.
intriguing, very
Yeah.
intriguing.
Oh yeah, for sure. Because I mean, if you go back, I don't remember what documentary I was watching, but you know, in some of the pyramids, you see drawings. They look like alien forms, like
Yeah,
what we describe as. So I mean, they're
yeah.
they're back, going way back in time.
Yeah, have you seen in Abydos in Egypt? There's the hieroglyphics that look
Yes,
like
yes,
helicopters and jet
yes.
planes and
Yeah.
tanks.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I mean, how can this be?
Right. Hmm.
We
Right.
have to say something was going on. And if
Hmm.
you look at like the trilithon blocks in Baalbek,
Hmm.
weighing over 100 tons each,
Hmm.
they were quarried, carried up a hill and put in place on top of other giant uh, quarried stones.
Right.
But over 100 tons,
Yeah.
like
That's awesome.
we can't lift them today.
No, 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 no.
And the beautiful rocks down in South America, the big boulders that are cut so perfectly
Right.
in walls that you can't even get a piece of paper between them.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
It's yeah, very intriguing. Very
it's very intriguing, and
yes.
these are the artifacts that we
Hmm.
find might well be proof.
Right.
Certainly for those of us who are willing to open our
In our
minds to
minds.
it,
Hmm. Hmm.
we we see this as pretty much proof.
Right. Yeah. Now, do you think that the paranormal UFPs, interdimensionals, all that kind of stuff has some kind of connection?
Well, I do. I think that because they're interdimensionals,
Hmm.
at least some of them.
Hmm.
If it's just the transcendentals, I don't know, but I think it has a lot to do with the afterlife, what we consider the afterlife, which is really just another dimension.
Mention. Hmm.
In the ancient times, they called it the other world, Avalon,
Hmm. Hmm.
Valhalla. They had different names for it. Where did we get these ideas about people, life continuing, or that
Hmm.
there could be like Avalon is where everybody's young and they're feasting
Right.
on fine
Oh.
foods and drink, and
Hmm.
it's a paradise kind of idea. And
Hmm.
you read the reports of the near-death returnees today, and
Hmm.
you've got something very similar.
Mm-hmm.
And the beings of light, you could certainly call them transcendentals,
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
believe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had an experience which I tell about in the book
Mm-hmm.
that has to do with the dream time of the Aborigines. I found a stone, an
Mm-hmm.
oblong stone in a cave when I
Uh-huh.
was living in Australia.
Uh-huh.
I was traveling from Perth to Melbourne, where I lived at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and just pulled off the highway and went down to a beach to take the afternoon off because I'd been traveling, for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And went exploring once I set up the tent, and I saw this cave
Mm-hmm.
that was right on the water. And when I looked inside, I could see brilliant sunlight.
Oh.
And I was intrigued by that.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized this was probably would become a blowhole when, the tide was high.
Mm-hmm.
But the tide was low, so I crawled in.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally had to crawl in. And in that sunny patch of light was an oblong stone about as long as my forearm.
Oh, wow.
It had crisscrossing bands on it,
Mm-hmm.
and it just looked like it'd been rolled in the surf for who knows, millenniums for all we know,
Mm-hmm.
And I love stones and shells and things
Oh,
like
yeah.
that.
Me too.
Avid collector, So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, I took the stone home with me, thinking it was a natural thing,
Mm-hmm.
like I say, rolled in the surf. And the next day, I took it home and arrived back in Melbourne in the afternoon, took a shower,
Mm-hmm.
sat back on the bed. I just brought stuff into the bedroom and
Mm-hmm.
threw it on the floor, like you do after a
Yep.
long evening.
Uh-huh.
I sat back on the bed and I was reading a book of poetry, just relaxing. When I happened to look up toward the light that hung from the center of the room,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a mist to be seen all around it,
Oh,
a
wow.
very thick mist. And I started playing with the lights to make sure I wasn't imagining things or trying to figure out if something could be burning. There was no smell like that. But then I noticed over by the old Victorian fireplace a spiral of energy circling in the mist.
Oh, wow.
Now, if the mist hadn't been there, I wouldn't have been able to see this at
Right.
all.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a clock beside the bed, and for over an hour, I kind of telepathically and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes kind of quietly spoke to this because I just sensed this was an intelligent entity of some kind.
Uh-huh. Wow.
And at one point, it came toward me
Mm-hmm.
and entered me and swirled around like it was checking me out.
Oh, wow.
And then it backed up,
Mm-hmm.
and it was large. It was like as large as my arm or my leg or something. So
Oh, my
this
gosh.
was no little thing. But then a car started outside the house, and somehow that sound, that
Uh-huh.
mechanical noise, must have startled it or something, and
Mm-hmm.
it started crackling and shot up through the ceiling.
Oh, my gosh. Wow.
And in an instant, the mist cleared out.
Hmm.
Now, 2 or 3 days later, some Australian friends came over and I
Mm-hmm.
showed them the rock.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, I hadn't made a connection yet, but they
Uh-huh.
said, I think you have an Aborigine artifact here.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, and for starters, that's illegal to move them. So they're like, you
Oh,
could be in trouble here.
oh no.
But then about a week later, I was out on a Saturday afternoon shopping and stuff, and I went into this Aborigine store where they sold
Mm-hmm.
didgeridoos and boomerangs and all that kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And there was an Aborigine woman in there.
Mm-hmm.
So I told her about the stone, and I said, I may have taken an
Yeah.
Aborigine artifact from its proper cave there.
Yeah.
Uh, she was very kind about it. She said, look, I have a friend who's a professor at the university, and he
Mm-hmm.
knows all about this sort of thing. He's half Aborigine himself.
Oh, wow. Okay.
She said, bring me the stone, and I will take it to him.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that.
Mm-hmm.
And a few days afterwards, I got a phone call from her, and she
Mm-hmm.
was like, so sorry. I'm so sorry. I had to give the stone back. And I'm like, what? Well, what happened? You know, and she said, oh, it was identified as a Dreamtime Power Stone
Oh,
called a Chiringa, and a Dreamtime entity was residing in that stone.
oh my, wow.
Yeah, as a non-corporeal entity of some kind, and they, the professor called the South Australian Aborigine Society, and would you believe it? They flew two Aborigine shaman down to retrieve that stone.
Oh, wow.
That's how important it was to
Marvelous.
them.
Oh my gosh.
And the woman, she tried to say, "Look, it's not mine to give," you know,
Hmm.
and they were not going to take that from her. They said, "You give us the stone, or we point the bone at you."
Oh, man.
This to an Aborigine is a death sentence.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
We're talking pretty serious stuff here.
Oh my gosh.
So anyway, I had like nightmares for like a week after that. I don't know. It was just all very powerful.
Hmm.
But then I started doing research and I found out that there are like hundreds, if not thousands, of spirals pecked into the stone all over Australia.
Oh, wow.
These are called petroglyphs.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
now living in Ireland,
Hmm.
I went to a place called Newgrange, which is supposedly or reputedly 5,000 years old. And
Hmm.
guess what's in the stone there?
Oh,
Spirals.
science. Oh my gosh.
Spirals.
Oh, wow.
The
Don't be
famous
picking any
triple
more
spiral.
stones.
So, you know, the Celts regard the spiral as a sacred shape as well.
Hmm.
So I just think for me now that convinced me that there are non-corporeal entities
Hmm.
who kind of exist in another dimension.
Hmm.
And yeah, I tie it all into the afterlife and the transcendentals of UAP lore or UFO lore. And it's just all fascinating,
Oh,
really fascinating stuff, you know?
oh, oh, yes, it is for sure. Now, I know earlier you were talking about, and this was kind of talking about dreams, and you said you have lucid dreams and things like that. You also talk about paranormal pipe dreams.
Uh-huh.
So what is,
Well, paranormal pipe dreams is I kind of look at what's going on. Like if you look at like the Marvel movies
hmm, hmm,
that are so popular, you know, they these beings, they just have their superpowers are
yeah,
just amazing, right?
hmm,
So like I kind of see that as a pipe dream. Like we humans want to have these kind of powers.
ours,
Now
uh-huh,
the ancient yogis in India talk about the siddhis, which are the powers that a yogin can acquire
hmm,
through intense meditation. And so it's kind of like in the West, we have kind of what I call in the book the cartoon occult.
hmm,
It started out with Superman in the comic books,
hmm,
and you know we then have Batman and all these various superheroes
hmm,
and villains, people with superpowers and so forth. So it's an entertaining chapter, really,
hmm,
about the way paranormal things are perceived today.
right, hmm,
And then I tried to carry on in the further chapters, saying, you know, what is the reality
hmm,
versus these paranormal pipe dreams we have about superpowers,
hmm,
and what's ultimately most important. Like we we tend to tie the paranormal into spirituality, as and the yogis warned this yet thousands of years ago, like not to think that acquiring superpowers is what makes you more spiritual.
hmm, hmm,
Spirituality is about treating other people kindly and with
right, right,
compassion,
hmm,
and you know, having empathy for what people are going through.
hmm,
We live in a very dualistic world where good and evil exist, and positive and negative, and
hmm,
you know, life I think is meant to be a spiritual challenge
hmm,
where are confronted by these things in a very, very real way.
hmm,
And this is what will enrich us if we um, if we take these things to heart and really try to grow ourselves, grow the soul, evolve spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you look at the state of the world today, and it's pretty frightening.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to give people hope that that an Aquarian New Age is possible if
Mm-hmm.
only we wise up and start taking climate change more seriously and quit being greedy
Mm-hmm.
for the way so many corporations put greed above the planetary health that affects
Mm-hmm.
us all.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that's all part of the book. I talk about social media
That's
issues to some extent, and
mm-hmm.
but tell my stories. I talk about music. Bob Dylan, the Beatles, I have chapters on them where I'm talking about music as a transcendental medium.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot, I cover a lot of territory in
Sure,
the
you
book.
do. Yes, you do.
And I just think that's what makes for a fulfilling life is to have, we're multidimensional beings, but even just in the worldly sense, there's so many interesting things
Mm-hmm.
to look at and to deal with. But a lot of young people can be confused, as they're coming of age in these times. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, trying to be reassuring, but I'm also talking to my own generation, which was, the love generation,
Mm-hmm.
the flower children, and the beats coming out of that. I talk about what happened with the beats, the beat writers,
Mm-hmm.
and then I tell about how I was inducted into the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn at a certain point. Studied Aleister Crowley and
Mm-hmm.
Robert Anton Wilson, Timothy Leary are very involved with that. Those were all Falcon Press authors.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also have a chapter called The Martian Odyssey as Magic Theater. And
Mm-hmm.
my last fiction book was called Crimson Firestorm Mars.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a thriller about the race to be the first to blast off for Mars and set up an interplanetary colony there.
Yeah. Wow.
And I talk about how, like, if you're going to be traveling on a rocket going to Mars,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to want to have your powers of meditation very well honed because you're going to be sitting there a long
Long
time,
time.
almost up to a year. And then
Mm-hmm.
what you're going to deal with is further amazing because you're going to land on a cold desert and you're going to have to live out the rest of your life there. And the thing that I point out is currently there's no way to come back from Mars. So what that kind of is like is the idea that when we die, we
Mm-hmm.
leave this earth seemingly forever.
Right.
Although I do think you can come back in a different form, but
Uh-huh.
in a new body and so forth. But so the Buddhists have what they call a death meditation. So I kind of tie all that in together.
Uh-huh.
So I think meditation is the key. I've tried psychotropics over the years, entheogens, as some call them, things that open the mind to divine energies. And I believe that's all very real,
Mm-hmm.
but very much into protecting my health as I grow older. And it's all about being healthy and keeping your mind intact. So meditation is my current thing.
Mm-hmm.
Mindfulness is talked about in there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a wide-ranging bit of writing topics that I think can help people to grow spiritually enriched on many fronts. And my whole thing is to inspire people to find the miraculous in the mundane and the sacred in the profane.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I want to do. I want people to realize that real magic is about altering your perceptions and your paradigms of what this life is all about. It's much greater than people think at a
Mm-hmm.
superficial level.
Absolutely. And it's a well-written book. Once again, it's called The Journey Across Forever. Um, And you can find that at John Hunt's Publishing, correct?
Yeah,
I'm sure it's probably on Amazon.
on Amazon and Barnes and Noble.
Noble.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Love to have people buy it
But it's,
and read it
yes,
and put up reviews.
absolutely,
You
yes.
know, an artist wants to be appreciated,
Right,
don't
yeah.
we all?
Oh, yep.
But you know, I put my heart and soul into that book,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
it's many decades of wisdom, I hope, from life experience.
Hmm.
So yeah, I highly encourage people to read The Journey Across Forever.
Forever. Now, do
It'll
you?
give you great hope, you know, about carrying on
Hmm.
forever.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It sure does. Like I said, it's a well-written book. Now, do you have any way, if anybody has any questions or anything, is there a way that they can contact you?
Yeah, my website is in my name, Wayne N. Saalman at gmail.com. So, yeah, you can contact me that way. I do have a Facebook page that you can contact me. And so, yeah, if you have questions, Facebook is probably the easiest and fastest. Just look up my name
Okay.
and we'll talk if you want to talk.
Oh, I'm sure we'll probably have some people with some questions. So, um, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you, Wayne. And once again, Journey Across Forever, go check it out. Amazon, John Hunt's Publishing, Barnes and Noble, probably anywhere you can get a book. Um, go buy it, leave reviews. If you have any questions, once again, get a hold of Wayne on Facebook. And like I said, once again, it was a pleasure talking to you.
Pleasure talking to you, Allison.
Oh, yes. Have a good night,
Thank you very
everybody.
much.